of the University of Barcelona between the year 1990 and 1994. We're very grateful and humbled to all our dignitaries and our speakers. We're honored that you could make it to our session. Welcome, and thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank Metropolis and Hyderabad for inviting me here. For me, it's like being in my own family. I've been in Metropolis for more than 10 years, so it's coming back home. And I have not been going too far away. I'm Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments, which is, let's say, the umbrella organization worldwide. So we have today a great panel of experts that, as the program says, have to talk about urbanization as the new buzzword. Okay. Lately, I think that we all are aware that cities have become a top priority. I would say not only for international organizations, not only for local and regional governments that probably were always having urbanization on the agenda, but also for many other partners. We have the private sector, we have the civil society. So today at the table we'll have representatives from very different fields and from very different sectors, and I think that we'll be able to get an overall view, different views about the process of urbanization. I'm supposed to give some data on the trends of urbanization, but I think that the data is there. I mean, if you look at the world from a Google satellite, probably you would say, well, in 2050, 70% of the cities of the population will be urban. 60% of the area expected to be urban by 2030 remains to be built. So I think this is a data, for instance, that gives us the possibility of thinking, well, we can do something about that. I mean, this is a transformative process that we could control, even if it's difficult, but it gives us the opportunity of doing something. On the other hand, well, we see also some tendencies. Probably all the data tell us that medium and intermediate, small and medium cities will be growing very, very fast, especially in Asia and Africa. We are told also that in many cities we are seeing a kind of a trend that we don't like that very much, that its density is lowering. So if density is lowering, that means that we are occupying more and more space in every city, and the urbanization process is sprawling, you know, on the skirts of on the limits of the traditional city. So those are data that we could give. For instance, another data that sometimes is that in the next 2 decades, the world will double the amount of land used for cities. That's also quite impressive. But I think that finally we have a panel that probably will not look at urbanization from the, you know, a satellite point of view. We have a group of people that are bottom up, that they have the reality in their job, and that I think that's the best interesting way. I think that the process of urbanization has to be seen by walking the city, by being at the bottom level and seeing what is going on. Sometimes I listen to some discussions and conversations at the United Nations, and they always say, we have no data. That's the same that, you know, the CEO of a company used to say when the company was not decentralized. You know, the CEO was so centralized that he was saying, we have no data, but the data existed. And I think the data exists also all over the world for each of every city. And I think this is a first step we have to do to realize that the world has to be more decentralized and that there is an opportunity to solve the problems of urbanization. So we're going to go first to Amita Bide from the Tata Institute of Social Science, which I think is one of those speakers that has the bottom-up approach. She's been very active on slum issues, related issues, on housing rights, also on looking at the economic aspects. I remember that the session today also was looking at informal informal economy, informal cities, and I think that it was the best case to start with India and the experience of Amitabh to explain us the situation of urbanization in India. Amita?
I'll thank the entire panel. I think we have an entire galaxy of speakers, and I should remain very, very conscious, therefore, of this opportunity which has been given to me in order to present my views here. What I'm going to talk about basically is, if one really looks at the overall evolution of cities into the world and its political economy, I think there are three phases that one can distinctly see. The first, if you really look at pre-modern cities and where the entire economy has, and politics, has revolved around political power and trade. That's decided the location of cities, how they will conduct themselves, etc. We moved on from there to modern cities, which are based on industrial capitalism and where the beginnings of international trade really started. And I think the contemporary phase, where from industrial capitalism we have moved on to an information society, and in which you have really world circuits of cities which are formed, where production has been decentralized. If one looks at the business strategies really of large firms, one sees that you do not have Fordist forms of production which are centralized anymore, but they are conducted through different sites at different parts of the world where you really test the economic competitiveness of particular sites. And instead, you see markets are being expanded and consolidated upon. And it is in this phase that we are really discussing the relationship between economic competitiveness and inclusiveness. Okay. Now, in that sense, if we start looking at metros and what do they embed, I think there are three things which I really want to bring forth. Okay. Talking about these multiple scales and the simultaneous presence of the local as embedded in the national and in the global brings across three processes which are simultaneously occurring, and often we do not recognize this. We talk of urbanization, but we do not talk about the other correlates of it. So one, along with economic growth, is also migration. And I think it's very important to realize this. The growing connectivity between different parts of the world, the exchange is there, and this decentralized means of production which are connected in different cities across the world has created many, many different challenges for different kinds and different scales of cities, not just in the global north, but also in the global south like India. And the third concomitant of this, again, which is very important, is really terror. If we look at a city like Mumbai within India, one understands that while the GDP of Mumbai has been growing annually at a rate of more than 8.5% per year in the last 6 years, at the same time, the proportions of migration continue to remain high, especially in the Mumbai metropolitan region, if not the city of Mumbai itself. And we have had more than 15 terror incidents which have claimed more than 2,000 lives in the last 10 years. So we need to recognize that these processes actually are occurring together. And unless we recognize the simultaneous presence and the relationship between these processes, we'll not be able to move ahead in an effective manner. So what is the challenge for contemporary metros? One, I think each of the metros especially has to deal with multiple and changing scales. Sometimes the local is important, sometimes in other facets the national is important, and in many other ways sometimes the global is important and comes into how you are governing the city in many different ways. And there are several unpredictable things, because while one can recognize the presence of multiple scales, one doesn't know at what level can you actually be able to intervene. Can you intervene at a national level? Can you intervene at a global level? Or where do you actually make a start? The second big challenge, I think, perhaps even more importantly, is that there are very, very high levels of interconnections between those very processes which are generating growth are also the processes which are generating vulnerability for cities. And I think this needs to be recognized. And in this fashion, I would propose that we need to look at social integration as really contributing to the resilience of cities and the vulnerabilities which are caused as a result of economic growth. So one sees social integration as a coping mechanism, but also as a growth multiplier. One needs to also perhaps recognize that social integration is not a matter of just one or two policies alone, but that it is generated through extremely complex interactions. Let me now go to the case of India and just see how all of this is playing through. So if one looks at the status of Indian cities, one basically is seeing that industry is really losing significance. In the last 10 years or so, there is an expansion in services, and there has been an extremely high demand for high value human capital, which one finds is a mismatch, because most of the human capital, because of lack of adequate national policies, is something which is low educated, low skilled, and extremely poor. The second thing I feel key in terms of looking at the status of Indian cities is the inability to identify what are those local niches. Okay, if you need to be economically competitive, but every locality, every city needs to find its own niche in a global scenario. And how does one find that niche for local economic development? And obviously, the reasons for this really rise in highly centralized and uniform planning. So the minute we start talking of smart cities, we apply like a one model of smart cities everywhere. If we start talking about reforms, there is one model of urban reform that we have across all cities of the country. And we see local bodies, municipalities, which are extremely weak, and where urban politics, even largely, with not just municipal politics, has been very, very slow to evolve. It is taking some shape now in states where you've reached like a significant amount of urbanization. Like if you look at states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, one is seeing that urban politics is beginning to evolve here. But in a large part of the country, we still see that politics is much more rural, and it's a control of the region over the city much more than the city evolving its own identity in terms of politics. Finally, it's a growth which is generating a very, very high proportion of inequality. So at one time, again giving the example of Mumbai, you have the world's 30 richest people who stay in this city, but at the same time, in a city like Mumbai, you have malnutrition levels which are lower than sub-Saharan Africa. And both of these exist in the same landscape. The other part of status of Indian cities is that, yes, one is seeing a very, very significant proportion of urban poverty, whether it be in very visible forms, in the form of slums, in the form of, I think, several professions that you must be seeing all being played out on the street and in public manner. The second thing that one needs to recognize are policies, especially welfare policies, are highly territorial. They are, so while constitutionally we may be recognizing that there is a right to move anywhere across the country, on the other hand, most of our policies which give any kind of social entitlements to people are linked to state governments, are linked to provincial governments, and they frown upon movement which is across states. Okay? The third is that within cities there is an extremely insignificant presence of welfare services. We have a much better presence in rural areas as opposed to cities. So one is seeing a twin, or I would say a trinity of phenomena, that you have poverty, there is several forms of exclusion, and in addition, communalization, which are all occurring together in our cities. And yet, in spite of all of these problems, there are three things which I feel make our cities much more inclusive and make much more tight. One is that there is an extremely significant presence of community relationships, that people don't exist as individuals, but people really exist as families, as clans, as very, very large communities who work together, live together. There is a very tight spatial mosaic, and which also has benefited people to a significant degree, which means that in most Indian cities, for all their inefficiencies, poor people are able to occupy extremely central, high-value lands in the city, which gives them access to a lot of services. And the third part, which is actually linked to this, is that the presence of a significant amount of public spaces and public services has meant that then the poor who have access to the city are also able to benefit from these services. However, these are changing. And I think that is something that what is happening to these. So what are we seeing as a result? If one overall takes and looks at an overview of Indian cities, you have cities which are accessible, but which are extremely uninclusive in the sense that they are very uncaring about what is happening within. So government policies are kind of not caring about people, but the way the society operates and the way the status exists is that it is basically community fabrics and social fabrics which actually are able to support people. They are low crime. Most Indian cities are extremely low in crime. Okay? So Mumbai, in spite of all of these terror attacks, has the reputation of, I mean, its crime rate is some 1 point something per thousand, which is one of the lowest in the world, especially for violent crime. But they are very, very vulnerable to terror. And on the whole, they are lacking economic competitiveness. So what does one do? And to my mind, there are just some 4-5 things. And I think coming to a conference like Metropolis, to me is very important. Important because a lot today is being talked about world-class cities. But I think more than world-class cities, such conferences encourage interlearning. Okay? Rather than following this country model and that country model and best practice models, I think people, mayors, administrators, politicians, learning from each other, I think is very, very critical. And from that point of view, I'm trying to outline certain ingredients which take and base themselves upon the strengths of Indian cities, but try to also build upon them. So one I see very clearly is that it requires a value change which recognizes that any kind of social integration thought does not come as an afterthought to economic competitiveness, but is actually integrated. Both of them have to go hand in hand. Because if you think of economics before social integration, you're only going to produce vulnerability. So economics and social integration needs to go hand in hand. For this, there has to be a value change. And one has seen that in the case of Kerala, where there have been several participatory budgeting experiments which have been adopted and which have been able to evolve a fully integrated system of welfare services and outreach services to the poor. Nagpur, if you see, one of the only cities in India, not very much talked about, but this is one city where several urban poor settlements have been able to win a right to land and stay and improve their houses on the very land that they stay upon. Local leadership, and I think again extremely key, very rare to find in a situation like India where, as I said, local institutions, local bodies are very, very weak. But here there is a lot to learn from. If you look at the examples from Brazil, where if you see cities like Porto Alegre and what a mayor like Jeremy Lerner can actually accomplish over a period of 3 terms. Or if you look at a very, very small town in Maharashtra like Dondaicha, where again a visionary mayor can actually produce a lot of good. Here, more than 90% of the city has been planned for, has been constructed extremely well, and in looking at the next 25 years. Local institutions, how do you develop outreach? How do you extend the overall fabric of welfare services? Again, not much talked about example, but Pune Municipal Corporation has this program called the Urban Community Development Program, which is a fantastic outreach service to most of the urban poor settlements in the city. If you look at local politics, again, a very, very important arena if one has to build upon the strengths of Indian cities. And here, perhaps I think Mumbai presents a very interesting example, because it is only on the strength of local politics that here in the city, there is no other example, perhaps in the country, where urban poor settlements have been rehabilitated in situ, in the place that they stay in. In most other cities in India, urban poor are, in the name of inclusivity, actually driven out of the city. Okay? So I think what local politics can do is something one is seen in Mumbai. In doing all of this, however, one is also grappling with certain other examples. How does one conserve the social and spatial fabrics which have actually served to preserve the social integration within cities, which have actually contributed to these low crime rates in cities, which have contributed to the resilience in Indian cities, and one really doesn't see just now forward-looking examples, especially in policies and places where this is being done. The second thing where I really feel ki I'm failing to find any examples through a scan of environment in the country is, do we really have institutions, do we really have people which have the intelligence to cognize what are the social changes which are happening in our cities? Because unfortunately, all our local bodies and all our even regional planning authorities lack any kind of a wing to even think of what are the structural and social changes that one is seeing, leave alone what to do about them. Okay? So this is, I think, a very, very important arena of developing intelligence in order to look at what are the warning signals to see that there is social disintegration which is happening. Finally, I think, how does one move on to creating new and new layers of more inclusive policies? Fine, we have cities which have incorporated the poor within their fabric, but we also have cities which are very, very uncaring. We also have cities in India which are not having any welfare policies. So how does one build on further layers on this? And here I think the entire example of Curitiba is a very, very instructive example. Curitiba in Brazil basically tells us that planning for the poor and planning for social integration is not a matter of a single program. It is not one single mantra which is to be followed over a period of 5 years and then done away with. But it has to be something which has to be consistently built upon as an agenda over at least 10 to 15 years, if not more. Because social integration will always pose new and new challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mida, for a very interesting speech. You have touched, I think, many of the subjects that are confronting local and regional governments. You have mentioned the multiple scale idea, how to work together local, national and global. You have mentioned the issues about social integration and the idea that the social aspects have to be taken at the same time than the economic aspects. We have dealt with a subject that sometimes is not that much taken into account, that it's politics and governance. This is a key issue: local leadership, local institutions, democracy, decentralization, all those issues. And you have also touched on one of the key trends that we are seeing everywhere, that's inequality and the relation between growth and inequality. So those are issues, and you have given us also some key ideas on how to attack those problems. So thank you very much for your intervention. Now we are going to look at another aspect. Lately in many of the international forums and global discussions, the business sector is there. And we were attending, for instance, the high-level panel on the post-2015. The business sector was represented, and I think there is a new role to be played by the business sector. We have with us Jan Phelan, who is the director of the Indian World Business Council for Sustainable Development. This is probably one of the most influential organizations right now from the business sector at global level on sustainability. So I think that it's worth to have the view of the private sector on those issues. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Joe Phelan. I'm the India Director of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I'm going to share a program called the Urban Infrastructure Initiative as a new model for collaboration between cities and business. It's been a 3-year program involving 10 cities, and it's been like a laboratory for cities to turn their visions into reality. And the program has shown that cities can really benefit by early engagement with business rather than the traditional engagement with business at the procurement stage later on in the planning cycle. So I work for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We're a CEO-led organization of about 200 companies. We're focused on business solutions for a sustainable world. And we have a vision for 2050. And when I say we, I mean these 200 companies have created a vision of 2050 of a world where 9 billion people live well and live within the boundaries of the planet. And we're now working to enable that and business to contribute to that by focusing on core business solutions by companies that add value and promote sustainability, by really pushing the business case and by promoting collaboration. And a key part of that clearly is collaboration with cities. This vision of 9 billion people living well and within the boundaries of the planet, you know, the first insight that's relevant for today that we had was that that vision won't be achieved without the active insight and engagement of the Indian business community, because it's too big a proportion of the world, and too many of the challenges that we all face are located here. So just over a year ago, we incorporated the organization that I run to really uncover Indian solutions and promote them and scale them within India and promote them internationally, but also show within India that business has got a role here to play. And listed at the bottom here are 2 of our key partner organizations in India. The second obvious insight that's relevant for today is that this vision of 9 billion people living well won't be achieved without addressing at a city level what the key sustainability challenges are for people. So it's a major focus of our work. So, you know, we've heard about this morning and already today. By 2050, more than 70% of our people will live in cities. And just one example, 70 to 80% of all global resource use and emissions will be coming from cities. And again, we know, not just in India, but all around the world, that these very fast-growing cities are really struggling to provide or to meet the infrastructure needs of their cities. And our view is that the battle for sustainable development will be won or lost in cities. So it's a big focus for us. So cities are taking action, and city leaders, perhaps like yourselves, have ambitious visions to make their cities more sustainable. And you know, we think a sustainable city is more competitive. It's a city that lifts citizens out of poverty, as Amita was describing, and it's a great place to live and work. But what we know is that city leaders can't do it on their own, and that realizing these sustainability visions is very, very complex and usually requires transforming the design, the construction, the operation of city infrastructure services, and also optimizing the interlinkages between them. So to help cities turn that vision into action, our hypothesis has been that business can help, and that the resource, knowledge capability and execution capability was not being utilized. So this program that we've been developing and running and testing over the last 3 years was to build a platform for a multi-sector, multi-expertise business engagement with cities early on in the planning cycle, because too often companies are asked to provide their solutions and their know-how at the end of the process, rather than after the vision is developed. So this is the model. This shows the traditional engagement point for the private sector at the end of the process, after action plans have been developed and at the tender and procurement stage. And our model has been to have an early engagement with the city right after the sustainability vision has been developed. It's a new model, and the idea is to get companies engaging where they can have most impact. We heard from Joseph about the challenges that urbanization presents all of us, and that as citizens, we need to find new models to tackle these challenges. And here is one approach which has been tested modestly, but perhaps is something that you could look at adopting in your cities. One of the key barriers to engaging, or the key issues around engaging companies early on in the process, is a fear of getting biased input. Companies may have a commercial interest later on in the process. There aren't any engagement rules for this process. None existed. But what there are very often are very strong procurement rules. So we work to create a platform to help overcome some of these barriers, so that cities could do companies could do pre-competitive work with cities to bring their knowledge, their ability to optimize systems, and to create action plans that would then be much more implementable, could be deployed, bringing multi-expertise to cross-cutting issues for the city. These are the companies that were involved in the group, and you'll see that it's a multidisciplinary group of companies. You'll see that there are competitors in that group. So the obvious example would be Nissan, Honda, and Toyota. And that was actually useful because when we're engaging with cities, we wanted to be clear that that this was pre-competitive work, that this wasn't going to be directly linked to any kind of tenders. And by having companies from the same sector, we're able to demonstrate that this was a sincere engagement. It's also, you'll see, it's not an exhaustive group. There are a number of knowledge areas that weren't in our group, and so when we were engaging with cities, we weren't able to bring those particular sets of expertise to bear. And the obvious one would be about IT. This group was weak on the IT sector. But as a methodology, we feel it stands up. A critical role was played by what we call bridging organizations. These were essential for identifying which cities we should work with, those who were forward-looking and had the capability to have an interaction of this nature. And they made the initial introductions, and they facilitated the early dialogues. And we did the study in 10 cities, in 7 countries. Those of you who know India won't be surprised to know that where every other country we were in, there was 1 city. In India, they insisted on 4 cities. And here's what we found. So the process, if I just go back, the process became like a lab between city leaders, municipal leaders, and engineers and content specialists strategy specialists from business, where they spent some time brainstorming and really trying to understand what the key problems that the city vision was trying to address. And if I can give an illustration, in Surat, Siemens were one of the companies that were involved, and they said that they'd been asked to pitch for a traffic management system to cope with the high volume of traffic in the city centre. When they worked with the city, they understood that the key challenge was actually about energy needs for the micro textile companies in the middle of town, which was currently being met by coal trucks coming in and dumping coal into the middle of town. But by providing micro renewable energy solutions, that traffic problem could be removed. So instead of pitching for a smart traffic management system, ultimately the tender document that went out was for alternative energy sources. What we found was that by having an early engagement with cities, this could be a win for mayors. So in every case, we got strong endorsement from the mayors. We found that it could yield practical, low-cost solutions for citizens, and we found that it was a success for companies too, by growing the market for more sustainable products and services. These are the cities that we worked in. I'm just going to give you some very quick highlights. Turku was all about transport and energy supply. They've implemented they put out to tender now a light railway and put in a policy framework for biogas as an energy source on the back of the study we did. Tilburg was about transport buildings, business parks and energy supply. In Gujarat, a big focus on wastewater treatment. Yixing was also about transport and led to a tram being put in. Kobe, we heard about resilience, and Kobe, there was a big focus on disaster management and resilience of the city. Guadalajara, security, waste management and water management, similar to Gujarat. And in Philadelphia, it was about their fleet management, a much more practical operational matter for the city. So these are, those of you who might be looking to engage business in a similar way. These are the key success factors that we found, and we've got a study on it called the Urban Infrastructure Initiative Report, which I'd encourage you to download and read. And I think a key thing here is the role of these bridging organizations. So you need a neutral body who can convene companies, and you need a neutral body who's able to liaise between the city and business effectively. A big part of success was bringing those on the company side who understood the particular country context, as well as some with international perspectives. No best practice, just different insights, were important. Here's a list of potential applications, and what isn't here is this point about social cohesion, which I think is a really important point from Amita's presentation about the resilience that comes with strong societies. But it can be, this model we think can be applied in a number of ways. And then just to finish, we've summarized the recommendations for cities. Do seek to engage business in non-traditional ways. It can really help strengthen your own cross-departmental coordination and help bridge some capacity gaps that all cities face. For companies, it's about parking the short-term commercial interest and being willing to engage with others, looking at the sustainability angle. And then for a key role for these bridging organizations. For us, cities are a central part of our strategy. Already in India, we have an engagement with Indore looking specifically at mobility. It's a deeper engagement than the first round, and we're building in a lot more follow-up with the city, so it's over 4 or 5 years, so we can really support on the follow-through stage. We're looking to support action by cities and engagement by cities with business all around the world, so please get in touch. And my contacts are here, so you can get in touch with any questions or for copies of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I was recalling a report we did in Metropolis on innovation in cities, and some of the issues you have raised were clearly there. And I remember discussing with the private companies the role of legislation and procurement rules, how sometimes they are, a difficulty to overcome if you want to innovate in cities. And this is something that I think that sometimes we have to solve, even if we are aware that sometimes that could leave you more freedom for corruption or for a very special treatment for companies. But I think we should try to overcome this problem, because if not, sometimes the long-term investment on innovation that is needed cannot take place. So I think this is a key issue. Well, now we're going to go again to a bottom-up approach. We have with us Park Zhao, the mayor of Johannesburg. He's been very active all his life on urban development. And I would say that, as Amira was asking, he is one of those leaderships that is trying to walk the talk. So, Mayor, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much to the facilitator, and good afternoon to everybody. The presentation would really seek to look at issues within Johannesburg and contextualizes the socio-economic context of local governance in Johannesburg and South Africa. And I'll try and express what the city's strategic intention and direction is in terms of its overall growth and development strategy, and then focus on key interventions relating to advancing socio-economic conditions in Johannesburg, with a specific and particular bias to the issues that are raised for the topic this afternoon, related to matters of exclusion of the poor and marginalized in our cities, and therefore how we need to respond to facilitate integration and involvement. Just in terms of introductory remarks and to create further context to the discussion, the reality that city development is changing is something that we've possibly engaged with from a number of presenters, both in this session and in previous sessions, and certainly would be part of the discussions going forward, and the role of cities in urban development, not just in urban development, but actually its strategic role in modern civilization is an important aspect to consider as we think about development going forward. Many cities across the world have been faced with a significant loss in inclusive power and in cohesion, and with that an increase in forms of exclusion and polarization. So many people who seek to integrate and find themselves within the urban system necessarily are marginalized by the way in which the urban system is structured, designed, but also is able to integrate and involve people in how it develops. So cities in their very nature, as they develop and evolve, tend to attract people, yet when they arrive in cities, they tend to exclude them and marginalize particularly the poorest people in the cities. Global changes have expanded the geographic linkages, and there's therefore greater linkages between cities and people. And the emergence of new actors has altered the balance between the formal and the informal economies. And progressively, the realization of how an important role in the informal sector plays in our cities in terms of job creation, enterprise development, but present in themselves contradictions that I'll discuss a bit later. Just to talk about Johannesburg briefly, Johannesburg is home to 4.6 million people, accounting for about 36% of the Gauteng city region, and Gauteng being in itself the smallest province in our country, yet the most populous province in our country. It is an urban conurbation with 3 metropolitan centers side by side to each other. So for those who have traveled to South Africa, you would probably land at the airport and they would say, welcome to Johannesburg, but actually you are in the metropolitan municipality of Ekurhuleni. So in reality, you are unable to differentiate between the metropolitan municipality of Ekurhuleni with that of Johannesburg, with that of Tshwane, which is the capital city. So it's a very integrated urban conurbation that functions as such. It is estimated that our population grows at an estimated 3.16% per year, or an estimated 120,000 people per year. So if you look at the census periods in our country, in 2001, Johannesburg was estimated to be standing at about 3.2 million people and grew by census 2011 to 4.4 million people, and is progressively increasing, with projections that by 2030 we anticipate to have 8 million people, and by the period that we've worked on our strategy, which is 2040, we anticipate to have 11 million people. And this growth is primarily linked to migration, which is characterized by rapid population growth, a huge bulge, huge migration levels, and therefore pressure in the housing rental market. Just to indicate, for example, if you look at the slide there, the pyramid at the bottom is an indication of what we define as the youth bulge in Johannesburg. That in fact, the highest number of people in the city of Johannesburg tend to be between the ages of 20 and 34. that really constitutes the core of the urban population of Johannesburg, reflective of people that are continuously migrating into the city, and of course shared almost equal in terms of relative size to the community between the genders. Now, placing local government in context in South Africa, local government has contributed to the achievement of a whole range of social and economic advances and has been at the core of driving significant interventions. Local government in the South African context is of course, a constitutionally recognized sphere of government with original powers defined in the Constitution to undertake a number of things, and this would range from transportation planning, spatial and land use planning, the provision of basic municipal services, including water, electricity, sanitation. It would be the key institution responsible for implementation of human settlements programs, a lot of these subsidized by national government, but to a large extent, the local government sector is key in terms of implementing and defining how the urban system works. In fact, the Constitution prescribes that local government shall, amongst others, implement local economic development initiatives. So it has a constitutionally prescribed mandate to ensure the growth of the local economy. And the reality is that the majority of our people have increased access to these basic services. We come from a history of segregation and exclusion, and local governments in the country have been at the forefront of driving a program of ensuring that those communities historically excluded and marginalized are integrated and are able to access basic municipal services ranging from water, sanitation, electricity, and other municipal services, waste management, etc. And in order to consistently remain at the forefront of the government, the developmental challenges that we deal with, we have begun to reassess our own sort of governance approaches, our own sort of developmental approaches, and began to respond in a comprehensive way to the issues that we deal with. How do we move beyond the agenda of basic service provision to an agenda of fundamental social transformation, an agenda that begins to respond to the real issues that our communities are facing, the reality of unemployment, inequality, and poverty in our cities and country. And for us, this is driven through a long-term strategy, Joburg 2040 Growth and Development Strategy. This has been at the cornerstone of what we've been driving since the elections in 2011. It is a comprehensive strategy underpinned by 6 key principles which seek to ensure that, if I may just go through the principles themselves, we're able to eradicate poverty, that we build a growing and inclusive economy, that we facilitate social inclusion through support and enablement, that we facilitate and develop sustainable human settlements, that we ensure resource security and environmental sustainability, and that we promote good governance across the board. And in this regard, we've identified, which is really the pyramid there, 4 key outcome areas. These would be the 4 key outcome areas to enable us to achieve our objectives by 2040. And the purpose of my presentation today would be to look at the first outcome, which relates to an improved quality of life and development-driven resilience for all. So whilst there are 4 outcomes, today's presentation is rather more focused on the first of our outcomes that are defined. And that outcome relates to particularly dealing with and focusing on the social development aspects of our growth and development strategy. The reality that we are a city that continues to attract people, that continues to confront challenges of urban migration, but a city that is cosmopolitan in nature, that accommodates people from all walks of life, and that you can't wish that those people would stay where they are. People would continue to come in to cities, and they'd continue to come to Johannesburg in search of opportunity. And that we need to be dynamic in terms of our approach on how we continue attracting people and incorporate them and integrate them into the system. That we have to facilitate a transition of the poor. In fact, we usually say in Johannesburg that our responsibility is not just to help people in their poverty. It is not just to alleviate the poverty that people confront, but it is about ensuring that progressively we help people out of poverty and that we enable them to get onto the ladder of prosperity and continuously climb the ladder of prosperity. That it is a city where you should be able to find expression, and a city that enables you to attain and achieve your best potential in terms of talent, skill, and ability. It should be an enabling environment for growth and development. And we borrowed a quotation from New York that pretty much summarizes the sort of orientation and paradigm that we think is important. So just to say that it's almost a quotation that says, we accept the reality that our people continue to come to our cities, people continue to confront problems. Let us not look at their limitations, but let us ensure that as they express their potential and growth, that they are able to grow within the city and enable the city to advance. Just a few comments around the informal trading economy. It essentially has an approximate 191,000 people. It constitutes 10% of the metropolitan economy with 50,000 traders and 26% of those who are informally self-employed, rather that 26% of all informally self-employed workers in Johannesburg are part of the informal economy. So it is a significant part of the Johannesburg economy. And our response has been to ensure that, firstly, we understand and appreciate the role of the informal economy in Johannesburg and that we integrate it into the formal economy, but that we also deal with the contradictions that come with the informal economy. It contributes towards job creation, but on the other hand, presents urban management problems. And we have to continuously manage the paradox of what that presents. How do you regulate whilst you facilitate development? And this is done through a comprehensive policy for informal traders in Johannesburg that enables us to then drive a program, which program would include training, it would include programs about regulation management, but also programs about building dynamic partnerships that enable people to trade better, but to also consolidate their procurement, their storage and logistics in the informal sector. I think this is possibly the second last slide, and it talks about a comprehensive program that then seeks to ensure that we ourselves look at ensuring that those who are marginalized and excluded become part of the city through an initiative of the city that we've titled Josie at Work, which is an initiative that says, let us partner with our communities in delivering municipal services where they become both the producer of a service and the consumer of a service. And that through that dynamic partnership, we incubate local community-based enterprises and cooperatives as a means of facilitating both enterprise development and job creation. And we've isolated a significant portion of our budget to enable us to contract with people at a local level. It is, of course, a system that in many ways correlates to co-production models of development. It is really, and we kind of use this slide to draw a comparison between co-production with a South African and Johannesburg nuance that says that we can co-produce municipal services with communities, forming dynamic partnerships and facilitating self-reliance and skills development in our communities. The last slide is really about 3 key points that we need to make. That it is about the recognition of the community's way of life and tapping into the community's knowledge systems and their own cultural differences. So you do not always design services at the center and prescribe how they happen in communities, but you design them with communities. That we're able to improve the capability of communities, individuals and the state to function and flourish better, and that communities become the driving force for social change, redistribution, and urban regeneration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As you may see, there are a lot, well, at least one city that has already done the agenda post-2015, the agenda for sustainability. They are already working on that. Let me just remark one of the last point that Mayor Tao was mentioning about local knowledge. I keep repeating lately a phrase from Peter Drucker, the guru of management in the United States, that in the 1960s he was saying that if the central governments want to be efficient, they have to get rid of any action that requires local knowledge, local action, and local decision making. I think that was said in the 1960s, it's still true now, and I would add normally that things that require also local accountability. I think that's the other point. I think if we are able to give to the local level what they know better, and even at the local level also be aware that some of their knowledge is within the community, then we'll have a good point to start solving the problems. The next speaker is coming from Tehran. He's the Deputy of Urban Development Planning and City Council Affairs. I'll give the floor now to Mahmoud Salahi.
به نام خداوند بخشنده مهربان، عالی جنابان، شهرداران محترم، همکاران عزیز، از این که در جمع شما هستم بسیار خرسندم. برگزاری چنین گردهمایی‌هایی به ویژه از سوی سازمان‌های بین‌المللی معتبری مانند متروپولیس سبب تسهیل فرایند تبادل تجارب مشترک میان ما خواهد شد. تجاربی که هر روز بیش از گذشته بر اهمیت به اشتراک گذاری و انتقال آنها افزوده می شود. چرا که شهرها کانونهای توسعه و پیشرفت اقتصاد ملی و جهانی هستند و ارتباطات و سرنوشت آنها روز به روز در هم تنیده تر و به هم وابسته تر می شود. تحولات و فرایندهای جهانی نشان می دهد که در مقایسه با گذشته نقش بازیگران محلی در عرصه‌های بین‌المللی نیرومندتر شده و بسیاری از دولت‌ها تمایل دارند تا نقش حمایتی قوی‌تری از بازیگران محلی خود در شبکه‌های شهری جهانی داشته باشند. به همین دلیل شاهدیم که شهرها به عنوان بازیگران نوین عرصه‌های فراملی در مناسبات بین‌المللی نقش پویاتر و تأثیرگذارتری بر عهده گرفتند. دوستان ارجمند، فضای کسب و کار و فعالیت‌های اقتصادی در دنیای امروز بر دو مقوله بنیادی رقابت و همکاری بنا شده است. در جهان به شدت شبکه‌ای شده، از مناسبات اقتصادی رقابت‌ها به شکل فزاینده‌ای دنبال می‌شود و در همین حال همکاری‌های بسیار گسترده‌ای نیز شکل می‌گیرد. شهرها برای کسب فرصت‌های اقتصادی و به ویژه فراهم ساختن یک زندگی قابل زیست مبتنی بر توسعه و پیشرفت برای شهروندان خود به شدت با یکدیگر رقابت می‌کنند. هرچند شهرها تلاش می‌کنند تا در عرصه‌های فراملی مزیت‌های نسبی و رقابتی خود را ارائه کنند تا فرصت‌های کسب و کار و تجارت به سوی آنها سرازیر شود، در عین حال آنها به همکاری با یکدیگر سخت محتاجند، چرا که اساساً چالش‌های فزاینده می‌تواند در درون شبکه شهرها تسری و گسترش یابد. و همه مکانهای محلی را با مشکلات پیچیده جهانی مواجه سازد. جهان آینده ما فقط کانون رقابت‌های شهری نخواهد بود، بلکه مشارکت و همکاری شهرها با یکدیگر جهت حفظ تمدن بشری در فضای پرخطر جهانی هم به عنوان یک نیاز حیاتی مطرح است. انتقال تجارب و به اشتراک گذاری آنها از طریق سازمان‌های جهانی و منطقه‌ای در حوزه مدیریت شهری بخش اصلی حیات بشری در شهرهای آینده خواهد بود. همکاران گرانقدر، بر پایه همین تحلیل ما طی دهه اخیر در مدیریت شهری تهران مناسبات فراملی را در راستای تبادل تجارب و همکاری‌های میان شهری گسترش داده ایم، چرا که معتقدیم با به اشتراک گذاری تجارب میتوان از اشتباهات پرهیز کرد و بروز و گسترش چالش‌های شهری آسیب رسان را کنترل نمود. در این زمینه مدیریت شهری کلان شهر تهران ارتباطات خوب و گسترده‌ای را با سازمان‌ها و شبکه‌های همکاری منطقه‌ای و بین المللی ایجاد کرده است. طرح ایده و تأسیس مجمع شهرداران آسیایی و برگزاری موفقیت آمیز 3 دوره اجلاس آن در شهرهای تهران، استانبول و بانکوک در همین راستا قابل توجه و ارزیابی است. اجلاس 4م این نهاد نوپای همکاری بین مقامات شهری نیز به زودی و در ماه نوامبر در شهر هایکو چین برگزار خواهد شد و همینجا مایلم از شما برای شرکت در این اجلاس دعوت نمایم. تهران همچنین تفاهم‌نامه‌های خواهرخواندگی، دوستی و همکاری متعددی را با دیگر کلان شهرهای جهان در راستای گسترش همکاری‌های فراملی منعقد کرده است. شهرداران محترم، باور دارم اگر رشد و توسعه شهرها با همگرایی و انسجام اجتماعی همراه نباشد، سبب شکلگیری چالش‌های عظیم در مناطق شهری خواهد شد. هر گونه توسعه شهری و تحول در اقتصاد شهرها باید مبتنی بر مشارکت، آموزش و بهبود وضعیت افراد آسیب‌پذیر و کم درآمد شهری شود. شکلگیری تجارت و کسب و کار در شهرها و پیوند با فرایندهای اقتصاد جهانی بدون توجه به وضعیت طبقات اجتماعی کم درآمد منجر به عدم همگرایی و گسیختگی اجتماعی در شهرها خواهد شد که این خود ناپایداری را به همراه خواهد داشت. امروز کلان شهر تهران تجارب گسترده‌ای در زمینه توسعه شهری به همراه عدالت فضایی در توزیع طرح‌های توسعه و تسهیلات شهری در مناطق کم درآمد است. رویکرد اصلی به توسعه در مدیریت شهری، رفتن به سوی مشارکت پذیری اقشار آسیب پذیر در طرح‌های توسعه شهری، ارتقاء شهرداری از یک نهاد خدماتی به سوی یک نهاد اجتماعی می باشد. به تلاش می شود با گسترش و تعمیق رویکرد توسعه اجتماعی، ثبات و همگرایی اجتماعی در کلان شهر تهران ارتقا یابد. ما در سالهای اخیر با هدف تبدیل تهران به شهری جهانی، آینده نگر، اخلاقگرا، عدالت محور، سالم، پایدار، هوشمند، دانش بنیان و خلاق اقدامات مؤثری در زمینه توسعه زیرساخت‌های حمل و نقل، تکنولوژی اطلاعات و شهر الکترونیک، رونق کسب و کار و اقتصاد شهری، سلامت همگانی، فضای سبز، ورزش و تفریحات سالم، توأم با نگاه عدالت محور اندوخته ایم که این تجارب می تواند برای سایر کلانشهرهای جهان قابل بهره برداری باشد. مدیریت شهری تهران آمادگی دارد در چارچوب اصول انسانی و با رعایت عدالت و احترام متقابل این تجارب را با شهرهای علاقمند در سراسر جهان به اشتراک بگذارد و در مقابل از تجارب موفق دیگر شهرهای جهان استفاده کند. فکر می-کنم آینده تمدن و سرنوشت به هم پیوسته شهرهایمان در گرو گسترش این نوع تعاملات است. شهرداران محترم، در شرایطی که به رویداد مهم و تأثیرگذار هابیتات 3 نزدیک می‌شویم، لازم است در نظر داشته باشیم که انسجام و همگرایی اجتماعی و شکوفایی شهرهایمان نیازمند نگرش عدالت فضایی و اجتماعی در طرح‌های توسعه شهری است. دستور کار مدیریت کلانشهرها باید بر رفع نیازهای اساسی انسانها در شهرها و رابطه عقلانی و خردمندانه با طبیعت استوار باشد. مدیران شهری در جهان باید عدالت شهری را محور برنامه‌های توسعه خود قرار دهند. عدالت شهری و توسعه آن در کلانشهرها سبب پایداری، همگرایی اجتماعی و زیست پذیری خواهد شد که این خود مزیت‌های نسبی شهر را برای کسب و کار و رونق اقتصادی فراهم خواهد ساخت. در پایان سخنانم لازم می‌دانم از دولت و ملت شریف هند، شهردار محترم و شهروندان خوب شهر زیبای حیدرآباد و مسئولین محترم متروپولیس که این رویداد شهری مهم و تأثیرگذار را برنامه‌ریزی و به اجرا درآوردند، صمیمانه قدردانی و برای همه شما سلامت و موفقیت پایدار آرزو کنم.
Thank you for raising the issues about cooperation among local governments and the issues about knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange that I am sure that I know that Tehran is very active within Metropolis network. Thank you very much. Well, now I'll give the floor. We'll go to another continent. We'll go to another city. We'll go to the city of Montreal. And we have with us Marie-José Reed, who is Senior Policy Advisor of the Mayor of Montreal.
Thank you. Let me start by saying how delighted Montreal is to be back here in Metropolis. And our administration is convinced that large cities play a key role in the development of public policies that must increasingly respond to complex issues. I'd like to talk about the role of cities in creating a development model built around inclusive growth. I don't pretend that cities have all the answers, but I think they are a better place for addressing these problems. In its report, Urban Anthologies, Learning from Our Cities, the International Economic Forum describes cities as hotbeds for innovation and reinvention. It goes even further by calling the 21st century the centuries of the cities, adding that it will be marked by prosperities, inclusiveness, partnership, and sustainable development. Since 2008, half the world's population have been living in the cities. This share is expecting to grow in the near future, as we have seen this afternoon. The urban rising in a globalized world also changes the structure of our economy. In this new context, global cities became the main territorial centers of the economical growth through the concentration of financial flux, enterprises headquarters, and high technology services. Those global cities are in competition with each other to attract investment and be able to produce this kind of economic growth. But this competition and economical growth must be profitable for all. It must promote social and economical inclusion at the same time. Today at Metropolis Congress, large cities are united. Only at this table, we are cities from different regions of the world. We all have a different political, economical, and social context. Some cities have more challenges in infrastructure, housing, or education. But even with these differences, we all pursue economical growth for everyone. For example, Montreal is a city of immigrants. 1/3 of its population was born abroad. This arrival of thousands of immigrants every year from all over the world, pursuing for a better life, poses inclusion and social cohesion challenges. So we must ensure that such demographic and economical development in a world of global cities does not occur at the expenses of the poor, does not cause new social inequities, and improve quality of life for all residents wherever they come from. Inclusion is also guaranteeing equal services and a healthy environment for everyone. Cities consume precious resources in drinking water and all kinds of energies while generating greenhouse gases. At a time of limited resources, such development must also be based on principles of equity, sustainability, protection of the environment and natural habitats, and renewal of energy resources. Cities around the world have been shown that they can find imaginative and resourceful solutions in all these areas. Cities are the level of government best suited to resolving issues that directly concerning personal well-being and therefore inclusive growth. No one doubts that the vast potential of cities, but most of the new hurdles they face lies outside their traditional sectors of operation. This means national authority must be transferring to the municipal levels some powers. Once they get the power to intervene in social arenas, cities must change their attitude towards development. They must stop speaking of economic development here and social development there. They must stop placing these concepts in opposition to each other. There is only one kind of development. It is economic, social, and sustainable. The three go hand in hand. Cities must, of course, be competitive. They must attract capital, business, and talents. But their principle of economic development must not run counter to those of social progress. The question now is, how can cities foster inclusive growth? Here are some options. They can start with better planning land use and development to prevent the presence of poverty pockets, to promote the emergence of fully open communities, to support public transit and active transportation. This is what we're trying to do in Montreal. Any planning effort must begin with sustainable development through initiative involving private enterprise. For example, Montreal's affordable housing programs require private developers to contribute to a share of the cost of building social and community housing from their project. Cities can also take a part in the social economy movement by supporting and doing business with different nonprofit organizations. But cities can really take the lead in promoting inclusive growth by deploying new information and communication technology. Smart digital cities must not only improve the quality and speed of municipal services, they must boost participation by residents and bridge gaps between constituents and the city administration. Smart cities must, first and foremost, be inclusive. Every smart city initiative must include a commitment to use technology for the benefit of all citizens by increasing their participation in democratic life and municipal initiative. Such initiative must serve to broaden the public consultation process and communicate more effectively with residents by getting them involved in the search for solutions to routine issues. This is the path Montreal has chosen. We must make sure residents have access to the technology. We must also employ open processes for consulting and working with residents. City can, for example, organize hackathons by inventing programmers and developers to come up with new open source applications. We are all winners with this strategy. The city acquires a host of versatile services that respond more effectively to people's needs, while residents feel involved in the city decision-making and administrative process. This, then, is the role we see cities playing in inclusive development. Thank you.
Let me first apologize because you've seen that Joy, Phelan, and Amita, they had planes to catch, so they have had to leave. Now we're going to go for the last speaker today. We have with us Fatemeh Gayour, representing Mashhad. She is elected member of the Council of City Council of Mashhad and member of the Metropolis Women International Network. I still remember attending one of the first seminars of the Women International Network in Mashhad, an excellent seminar that was hosted in Mashhad some years ago.
Thank you. In the name of Allah, I am Fatemeh Gayour, a member of Mashhad Islamic City Council. I am glad to see you in the venue. I do believe that this conference is a golden opportunity to share our experiences and ideas in order to take our cities better and promote social justice. Implementation of social justice is an ever-evolving process. In fact, the list of steps to take is long, and perhaps we can say that is never ending. And so the important question is, where do we begin? Achieving the goal of social justice requires dynamic thinking and action, initially on the part of policy makers, municipal managers, and community leaders to politically acknowledge shortfalls. SOWT is the first point. I believe that the first step of sustainable development is to have economic dynamism. What is resistive economy? Self-motivated. It makes use of society capabilities, community, and extrovert. It communities with world economy. People-oriented. All cities, male and female, partake in it. Fair. Everyone has the same promotion, and it increases in national goals. Resistive economy helps a country to become independent. Cities have the capacities such as human and natural resources. Urban managers and local authorities should recognize, assess, and plan for this purpose. As you know, half of each society is women. Therefore, decision makers should plan for their job opportunities, especially for the poor ones. I would like to share the experience of my city. Mashhad city is the second metropolis of Iran. a land area of 204 square kilometers with 2,984,631 inhabitants. Municipality of Mashhad has undertaken policies and initiatives to ensure that poverty reduces. After a needs assessment of the female population, data was analyzed and interpreted, and then jobs project planning and designing to best suit their needs were undertaken. In order to encourage entrepreneurship and the provision of local handicrafts, the municipality hosts annual handicraft fairs and markets, which mostly attract local female artists. The municipality has also contract local markets to sell women's handicrafts and homemade goods in every city districts. By taking an active role in the art scenes in our city, the municipality is providing job opportunities and helping to encourage local artists, while preserving traditional and handicrafts. These types of program and empowering females to enter the work market and providing platforms for them learn and reach customers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the voice and the subject of the women on this table. We have now still 15 minutes to open the floor to the public. So I'll give the floor to any questions that you want to raise to the remaining speakers. No questions? Okay, then I'll take the floor to make a question, okay? No, I was wondering, because I think the mayor of Johannesburg raised an issue that it's very important. I think that at the city level, and for instance, to the experience of Brazil, probably started that, we realized that, you know, the favelas, the informal sectors, had to become neighborhoods. And I think now we are starting to see also some analysis on how to deal with the informal economy. And I think it was very suggestive what you mentioned, but I would like to know a little bit more on the programs that you are organizing to, in a sense, I think to take the view that, well, this is an informal economy that exists and that we have to help the economy to arrive to another stage and maybe incorporating to the normal economy on the long term. So I would like to know a little bit more about how do you are focusing on these activities.
Thank you very much. Just to make a few examples, starting with the transport sector. The vast majority of Johannesburgers use minibus taxis as the primary means of public transportation. And the minibus taxi industry has to a large extent been, in many instances, informal, but even informalization has not been fully integrated into the public transport system. So they would essentially provide the service, but would self-regulate, self-price, and so on. And when we introduced, for example, the city's BRT system, one of the key preconditions that we set for the BRT system was to ensure that we extend ownership of the system to the taxi industry as the primary owners, managers and operators of the BRT system. So it's almost been a transition from running a public transport system in a semi-formal environment into a very formal, structured environment where they run on a fee per kilometer basis. There are penalties, there are controls, there's formal employment of the employees that are there, whether it's drivers, whether it's in the depots, and all other employment opportunities that's been created. So it's enabled them to make the transition because taxi drivers would not be having any formal contracts of employment. They would not have prescribed working hours. So whilst the system is evolving and whilst the taxi industry still exists and is still a primary and important role player, we've seen them now being at the leadership of transforming the industry and at the leadership of actually providing the alternative, more organized, structured public transport system. The second relates to, which is the second example, relates to what I referred to as the Josie at Work initiative. In many ways, communities provide certain services to deal with the problems that they confront within their locality. Whether this relates to ensuring basic waste removal services in areas of informal settlements where people would find a communal skip where they take the waste services, and therefore the domestic service provision starts from an informal basis of individuals moving their waste to a centralized system. We are now engaging communities as contractors and engaging community contracts and cooperatives as a basis of providing the service. So it's about saying, how do we reorganize what has been an informal system into a more formally structured system that engages with the municipality. But we believe that it is important that we do not always prescribe the solutions to people as to how you're going to provide the service. It is about enabling communities to themselves think about the solutions and present the solutions for contracting with the municipality. And we've been going through an exciting period because we are actually in the middle of registering them as cooperatives. We are formalizing them into companies, training them in company management, but also ensuring that we're building the necessary capacity through capability support agencies, which are social entrepreneurs, non-governmental organizations that would provide upskilling, quality control, and other mechanisms of supporting what is essentially informal systems, and in many instances, non-existent systems, into formally structured systems of engagement and service provision. And the same applies to our informal traders. We've partnered with one of the local universities on training and skilling for informal traders. Issues as basic as cash flow management, even as you run a small micro enterprise. How do you ensure effective and efficient cash flow? How do you ensure quality control? How do you take advantage of the agglomeration effect of being located in the same place? So that in fact they are able to graduate themselves into traders that can continuously grow. So it is about ensuring that we acknowledge that they are at the leadership of the system, but that we provide almost training that supports them as opposed to trying to always prescribe what the solution is. Thanks.
Any question from the floor? Okay.
Thank you. I have a, I have a dilemma, and that is that as cities, as cities grow, the productivity of the city is dependent on the informal workers. The informal workers are able to provide cheaper services, and therefore the city is more productive. So fast-growing cities are actually benefiting from the informal workers. Now, on the other hand, we do believe, and all of us who work with slum communities and low-income communities, we do believe we need to formalize these people. Now, there is this contradiction that we would have to deal with, and I am wondering whether in Johannesburg you have been able to, come to this clarity on how this whole thing is going to pan out in the larger economic agenda of the city. Because just a second, additional question or comment is that I do believe that instead of formalizing all these things, we also need to informalize a lot of our formal systems, which would enable some of the informal workers to better access the city government and be able to help themselves to become formal. So I think there are some contradictions here that we might want to consider and resolve.
I think that's an interesting question because it's something that we've been dealing with ourselves over the past year or so. We initiated a process of inner city urban renewal, and one of the areas of people that were victims were informal traders for the problems of the contradictions that they present. Whilst you provide employment opportunities in an unregulated environment, the city decays and confronts a number of problems. And for me, one of the important lessons in that process has been to start answering the question, why do we have to formalize the informal sector if in fact it can be enhanced by informality? Why is the starting point formalization of the informal sector when in fact it thrives with informality? And therefore our role is almost reduced to one of saying, how do we improve the trading environment? How do we improve the allocation of sites, but allow and enhance the informality that's there? It's almost been a pushback from the traders themselves, because through their own pushback, they've almost pushed the city's policy backwards and said, your starting point might not always be about formalization. There might be instances where formalization works, like has worked successfully in the transport sector, but also it's in a limited part of the transport sector. But there are instances where, in fact, it is the informality that makes them thrive. And therefore, let us accept the reality of that informality and rather talk about creating more appropriate spaces to trade, as opposed to trying to license them and complicate the regulatory system, so to say.
Okay, thank you. I think we are arriving at the final stage of this session. I want to thank everybody for attending this session and for the speakers for giving us, his insight on this issue. I think that finally, the business of cities has been the business of people, the business of citizens. And we have been looking at different demands that people That's always to the leadership of any local government, and they are asking for health, they are asking for social services, they are asking for security not only in physical terms but on jobs and other issues. They are asking, sometimes they say, for respect to avoid inequalities. This is a matter of respect, and sometimes something that is more that we see also in Europe right now. I call it, the possibility of the freedom to pursue an autonomous plan of life. This is something that nowadays, even among the young people in European countries, this is not assured anymore. So we have to look at and then there are other issues have been raised about social capital. How when you live in cities, you are supposed to have social goods, and this is another very important issue. Finally, in some cases, has been raised that also all these activities at the local level have to be harmonized with nature, and this is the issues of the environment. So thank you very much for this session, and hope to see you again in another session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to all our speakers. This has been a very insightful session. We've had opinions from cities from all over the world, from Johannesburg to Mashhad, to Tehran, Montreal, the Indian perspective. So it's been a great session. Thank you so much. We'd like our moderator, Mr. Rush, to please facilitate the speakers with a small memento from GHMC. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.